I think of a leader as somebody who can help other people get from point A to point B, but through a certain inspiration that speaks to them uniquely. So as a leader, I want to help you get wherever it is that you are going.
For many, the pinnacle of achievement is landing a gig as the top dog. And maybe you've wondered what it's like in the C-suite. Welcome to Chief, where we talk with accomplished leaders to hear about their rise to the top. Moments of discovery, the truths and triumphs that have made them successful, and uncover the real truth about being boss. I'm Bryce Conlon, and I'll be your host. This is Chief. Hey there, and welcome to Chief. And today I have the great pleasure of talking with my colleague and my friend, Erich Kurschat. Erich is the visionary founder and leader of HR Hot Seat, a mastermind community for HR pros solving real HR problems. And they have grown like crazy since they started, with chapters popping up all over the country. Erich, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bryce. I appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah. So if you would you begin just by kind of filling in the gaps for our listeners? What is HR Hot Seat?
HR Hot Seat, I've come to call it an inclusive mastermind community. In essence, we are real HR pros solving real HR problems. A couple of years ago, I wanted to begin bringing together HR folks. And I was speaking around the city and going to different association meetings. And I thought, you know what, this would be so much more fun if I was the reason that people were coming together, that I was kind of bringing this community together and helping people connect with each other and with the products and services and the inspiration that I think people crave to do their jobs more effectively. And so I decided, okay, well, I'll give this mastermind format a try. And if I can get, 6 to 10 people together on a regular basis, I'll be pleased. Over the course of 2.5 years, that turned into over 1,500 members and several chapters. So
yeah,
it took on a life of its own.
And you guys are in multiple states now too. It's not just in Illinois anymore. You guys you're growing, right?
As of November, we had started out as the Chicago HR Mastermind, which was going to tie us, at least in brand, to this area. And we rolled out HR Hot Seat in an effort to be able to take this beyond the Chicago market. And so we are currently now also in Greenville, South Carolina, and Detroit, Michigan.
Very cool. Congratulations, by the way.
Thanks.
So when you what is your story from, your professional journey from where you started? Most of us get jobs, right? That's the first thing we do, is we get a job after college or after high school. And then at some point we find our way into various roles and positions that lead us to kind of this place of influence or of leadership. Tell me a little bit about that story. How did you find yourself where you are today?
Well, I definitely had a string of jobs growing up. And when I graduated from college and moved here to Chicago initially, I found myself with a rent that needed to be paid.
Right, the pesky bills, right?
I know. And so I honestly went to a local temporary staffing agency, basically, and said, I need work. I need to pay these I have suddenly after college. And I got placed at a company called Levy Restaurants. And they're headquartered here in Chicago, sports and entertainment, food service all around the country and elsewhere. And they said, you're going to be working for Levy and you're going to be doing HR. And I hadn't heard of Levy yet. And even as a psychology major, wasn't entirely certain what HR was going to encompass. But I had a job and I knew that was an important thing. Well, I ended up staying there, long story short, for 16 years and learning more about myself and about the workplace and communication in the workplace and what meaningful work looked like and what it felt like than I thought I was going to learn in that time. And now, granted, 16 years is quite a bit of time, but it just ended up being so eye-opening for me.
Wow. So, and that's where we met, was at Levy or through Levy. So you really, right out of school, that was your opportunity. That was your training ground. And that's really interesting to hear. The leadership over there, there's an unbelievable amount of incredible leaders in that in that organization. Is that where when is that where you found that you were you kind of found your way as a leader, as somebody who kind of came up through the ranks and had more and more influence handed to you?
I think so. Well, beyond a doubt. I mean, I was learning from people who were modeling it so well. And I think coming out of college, I did not yet have a firm grasp on what leadership truly meant. Although, in hindsight, I was surrounded by leaders throughout college and earlier on, clearly, but I hadn't really started to grapple with what that word meant and what it looked like and what it felt in a practical perspective. I think maybe I just always took it for granted.
Mm.
Suddenly now I was employed in a way that I hadn't been previously, in a salaried position beyond college, and having to figure out, all right, what is it that these leaders are doing, and how do I see them as leaders first of all? What are the behaviors that define this leadership? And maybe who am I surrounded by along the way, whether it was where I was working or elsewhere, that maybe didn't demonstrate, what I would come to appreciate in an effective leader. And so I started to think about these things in a different way that I think than I ever had previously. And Levy was just the perfect environment to learn how it's done well.
Yeah. So in that process, right? That process of defining, and I think defining words is actually really critical. My wife might disagree because I'm always well, hold on, honey, let's define this word, right? And she just wants to kind of get to it. But I think it's important because we throw words around all the time: success or leader or intimacy, yeah, anything, without ever properly defining the word. So how have you come to define leadership, and more specifically, maybe good leadership, rather than
Yeah.
just leadership generally, but good leadership?
Yeah. So I think of things in terms of behaviors. And so I don't know that I have a very strict definition around it, but, and all of a sudden I'm thinking of Simon Sinek and all of these books that I've read
Sure.
that have defined leadership in various ways. I think of a leader as somebody who can help other people get from point A to point B, but through a certain inspiration that speaks to them uniquely. So as a leader, I want to help you get wherever it is that you are going. And if it's through the mastermind, then that's one context for it. If it's through just a single workshop that I'm facilitating, that's another context. If I'm in the workplace and I'm in charge of, and it's funny saying, I was just about to say in charge of a number of people. That's one of the things that Simon Sinek has said, that strong leadership is not taking charge of people, but leading those who are in your charge. And I think is helping people get from one place to another, but in a way that inspires them uniquely based on what they individually need from you. That it's not taking a cookie cutter approach to how you motivate and inspire people, but it's rather recognizing people as individuals and meeting them where they are, understanding what it's going to take to get them from point A to point B, what uniquely may get in their way as a potential obstacle along that journey.
Very cool. So in that process, you're taking, it sounds like in the HR hot seat is a kind of a perfect opportunity to meet the individual where they are and then begin to grow with them and even solve the individual's problems or the problems that they're facing in their organization. What do you find is the most difficult part of leading well, or taking that kind of personalized approach to moving people from point A to point B?
So I'll be pretty honest with you here. I identify pretty strongly as being an introvert. And so for me, my strength is connecting with individuals. When I am standing up in one of our HR Hot Seat Chicago events, I facilitate our downtown chapter. I can be in front of anywhere between 50 and 100 or more people. As an introvert, that is not necessarily my comfort zone.
Sure. No, yeah.
So there's a reason why I started out defining leadership as leading individuals or meeting individuals where they are, because that's where I shine. That's where I want to connect with people. I want to know who Bryce Conlon is, the individual. Now Bryce is with 10, 12, 15, 100 colleagues, you know, and if I'm playing that role as leader in the sense that scales like that, how is that going to look and feel to me as somebody who identifies as being introverted? So I guess to answer your question, the challenge for me is understanding how to apply what I feel like I do naturally on a one-on-one level to a larger group of folks.
Interesting. How important do you think self-awareness and knowing yourself as a leader, as someone who is has people in their charge, as someone who is leading the pack and moving us as an organization, as a team, as an individual from point A to point B? How important is it that we know ourselves in that process?
Now, Bryce, you're speaking my language. This is
Take it home, Eric. I'm lobbing this one in for you.
I think it's so much of it, and not just because I'm introverted and value introspection and all of that, but I really think that there's very little you can do in life with confidence without first understanding who you are. And that could be personally, it could be professionally. Are you doing meaningful work? Are you in the right relationship? Are you connecting with people in meaningful ways as you walk down the sidewalk? I think it starts with first knowing yourself. In my experience, there are people who have taken more readily to that process and more eagerly to it, and some people who have, it's taken a little bit more time and a little bit more effort to get them there. And it's really just finding the appropriate inspiration. I believe that you can't motivate people. You can inspire people to find their own motivation, and I'm not the first person who has said that. But getting people to the to the place where they see the value in that self-awareness. I remember doing a DISC workshop once where we were reading through our profiles. DISC is a personality assessment that I work with, and we were reading through our profiles. And I said, you know, is there anything in your profiles, and I'm speaking to a group of people, anything in your profile that you disagree with? And one guy stood up and very vehemently said, this says that I am stubborn, and I am not stubborn. You know, and so when it comes to somebody like that, I think there's probably some work yet to be done. But I feel like that self-awareness is really the starting place for what could end up being a really meaningful journey for people.
Yeah, I actually agree. In our organization, we rely very heavily on kind of strengths assessments and this idea of self-awareness, DISC and Gallup Strengths Finders and Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and all of that, just to kind of get a sense of who we are as individuals and know where we fit in the organization and where other people can potentially fit. We use it as hiring tools. We use it as when a project comes down and we need to divvy out work, we kind of look at it that way. How have you seen kind of that self-awareness and the DISC model when leaders know who they are first and foremost, but then also know like the strengths and maybe the weaknesses or the penchants for the people who are on their team? How much better can we serve when we know the people around us?
Short answer is much better.
Yeah. Care to expound?
Next. I think in the absence of tools like that, as a leader, you find yourself surrounded by people. And you think, okay, my job, if we go back to how I originally defined it, my job is to get people from point A to point B. How do I do that? You know, and you end up almost, and I'm just kind of coming up with this as I'm talking, you're almost driving a pickup truck then with people in the back, right? Because that's an efficient way to get people from point A to point B, is say, you know, hop on, you know, and I will drive you there. I will take you there. But I think what that discounts is clearly the individual strengths and preferences of those people. And yeah, you may all end up in the same place, but have you successfully leveraged the individual strengths and preferences of the people on your team such that wherever you end up, you're not only there from a location perspective, or from an objective perspective, but you're there more effectively. You've enhanced what there is in some way through the people that are, in your charge, as we were saying, Simon Sinek talked about. So then the tool or the assessment becomes an opportunity to learn what those individual preferences and styles and strengths are for the people on your team, not only so that you're developing them as you go, but also you are developing yourself as a leader. You're maybe delegating some things that don't come as naturally to you, thereby giving somebody else the opportunity to develop. Or you're looking at what you do through different eyes because the people on your team are providing that perspective in some way that you never would have had you just loaded them in the back of the truck.
Yeah. Yeah. I love what you're saying, this idea. And what I'm hearing you say is you get so much more, there's a richness, right? There's a richness. There's a multifaceted approach when you allow others to come on the journey with you rather than just dragging people, putting them in the pickup truck and driving them up the hill or dragging them up the hill, which is kind of what I think we've seen is like the traditional model of leadership is just, kind of that superhero who just carries the whole team on their back. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it can be if it's not thought through, it can be more transactional in nature. That you're a body, and you came to me with a certain resume, and I'm going to put that body and that resume to work. And I feel like that discounts so much of who you are and who you could be in this process, and where you could end up once we get to point B, better position to contribute to this organization than you were before we started.
Yeah. Yeah. So did you ever see yourself growing and leading an organization? Did you ever like wake up as a little kid, right? Like when you were growing up, did you ever think to yourself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start an organization. I'm going to lead an organization. And really you've got a movement, right? Like you don't even have a company. You've got like a movement because you're trying to get, if I understand correctly, you're bringing HR people together to realize that collectively we can solve more than we can individually. Did you ever think, coming up through the ranks, or as a little kid laying in bed at night going, you know what I'm going to do? Did that ever factor into your equation, or was this kind of like totally out of left field?
I think at one point I wanted to play in the NBA. That was on my radar. That didn't pan out so well.
Not so much.
I thought at one point I might like books, which is interesting because I still enjoy writing in various ways. But at no point did it cross my mind that I would lead an organization. I mean, honestly, Bryce, even a few years ago, when I was transitioning from Levy into Harmony Insights, which is my HR coaching and consulting company, I was a disc guy, and I would come into workshops and I would facilitate a workshop. I kept coming back to the word facilitator, and that's something that still really resonates with me. It really isn't until very recently through HR Hot Seat that I've come to identify with this leader title in the way that we are talking about it. And I mean, if I can fully play my cards, I don't know if you're familiar with this. I believe you are, given conversations we've had in the past. That imposter syndrome.
Oh yeah.
Kicks in so quickly. You're in front of a group and you start using words like movement, like you just did, and community and regional expansion, some of these things, and you start to sweat. Like you start to get really nervous. But so I think it's very much a work in progress, and the extent to which I'm quote unquote leading, I think has yet to be seen. But I think for the first time in my life, I'm in a position to really, really embrace this word in a way that I haven't previously. And that doesn't mean I haven't been a leader. I think we can lead in different ways, with different sized groups of people, et cetera, in different contexts. But I think for the first time, standing up in front of a room full of people who are craving inspiration and resources and movement in their careers, et cetera, I'm finally in a place to figure out, okay, what does this really look and feel like?
Interesting. Yeah. Imposter syndrome is real. I mean, that is a real thing. I think I shared with you, we tried to launch this show a year ago, and we, bought all the stuff that we needed, recorded the first kind of intro episode and put the music together, and then just never went anywhere with it because of imposter syndrome. So who am I? Like, why does anybody want to talk to me, right? Uh, Interesting. So it sounds like, and in my experience, the easiest way to, or the only way to get over imposter syndrome is to just keep doing what you're doing, and eventually you add enough value, and people tell you over and over again, or they show up, right? You grow from wanting 6 to 8 people in a room, and you end up having over 1,500 members, right? Like, they've validated you. You are no longer an imposter. You have arrived on some level. Um, But you just said something that I think is really interesting, and that's kind of touched on this idea that leadership is not binary. It's not a you have it or you don't, right? Like, you kind of almost mentioned or alluded to this idea that you've been a leader in other roles in other ways in different places, but maybe never recognized it as such. Tell me a little more about that. Unpack that idea of, like, how do you know if you're a leader? Who is a leader, and how do we grow in this crazy thing? Can anybody do it? Like, tell me more.
I'm so glad you came back to that, because that really is an important point. I think it's so easy to talk in leadership with a capital L, but you don't have to have the title to lead. And especially comes up quite often in the disc work that I do when people say, well, what's the perfect disc? What is the disc style of a leader? Everybody's so curious. What is the perfect personality assessment in order to be able to lead effectively?
Is there an answer to that?
The answer is there isn't one. That the most effective leaders embrace whatever their style or preference is, and then adapt as necessary to be able to connect more meaningfully and productively with people as they go. And again, coming back to the models that we have in life, I worked at Levy for years with a woman who I could walk into her office and she would interact with me in a particular way based on what she knew I needed from her. I would leave, somebody else would walk in with a different personality and communication style, and like that, she would adapt, but in a very genuine way. So not in a manipulative way, not in a disingenuous sort of way, but she knew what individuals needed from her and was able to adapt to those communication styles. And I thought, well, man, that's what I got to learn to do. Turns out it doesn't happen overnight.
No.
Wow. And I was learning from somebody who, was a leader with a capital L. But going back to your question, then looking back, there have been times in my life where I feel now, certainly in retrospect, that I did lead without that title. And maybe it was something as simple as a friend or family member having a tough time and helping them get clarity around whatever it is that they were wrestling with. There takes leadership qualities. Maybe in the workplace, it's having been somebody's supervisor, who's early on in their career and trying to figure out exactly how to position themselves to be viewed as a valuable contributor to the organization, and giving them suggestions along the way, even if it was just in passing, in casual conversation, helping them set themselves up for success in a professional sense. I do, as I sing in a couple of classical choirs, in Chicago, and pulling some folks together when we could use a little bit extra rehearsal, outside of what's officially been carved out for us, and say, look, we got this performance coming up. We really need to pull this together, and being the one who then is taking that initiative.
Yeah.
There's leadership baked into that, whether or not I want to use that word or see myself in that light. Leadership qualities are baked into each of these examples.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. One of the things that we've kind of tossed around on our team is like defining leadership, right? Because everybody comes in and they want to know, like, well, what are my opportunities, and do I get to lead a team, and will I be a leader, and leader with a capital L. And we've kind of taken the step back and realized that leadership is just influence, isn't it? Right?
Yeah,
It's just like being able to show up at the right time in somebody's life and help them navigate from, as you said very early on, from point A to point B.
yeah,
Sometimes it's over coffee with with an old pal, and sometimes it's in front of 100 people when you're doing a disc workshop or the HR hot seat. It's really just about influence. And if I'm hearing you right, it's earning the right to influence. It's earning that privilege through
yeah.
knowing the individual.
Yeah, and Ernie, I think that's a great way to put it too. In that I've spent more time thinking through the term coach,
Mm,
because as I was trying to figure out what the heck to call myself,
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
my own small business,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I got to put something on a business card, and CEO didn't sound right, and founder was weird, and we've talked about that in the
Yeah.
past.
Yeah.
And
We
like, oh,
struggled with that. Yeah.
I like facilitator, and I like coach, and there's a certain amount of influence in coaching. But I mean, even in coaching, you're leading potentially an individual. The career coaching that I do, I'm leading them from one place to another, but they're not going to want to engage in that conversation with me, and accept my quote unquote influence, whatever that looks like, if there isn't trust in
Mm-hmm.
place, if I haven't demonstrated myself in various ways, if I haven't shown that I care very genuinely for who they are and what they're looking to accomplish. There's so much wrapped up in this. And I think that there's only a certain portion of it that you can learn formally in school, or even in work. It really, so
Mm.
much of this is something that has to be picked up in observation of people who do it well, trying it on, failing at it, feeling like an imposter,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then getting to a point where, okay, maybe I'm a little bit more comfortable with the title and what it entails. But if you ever at any point get too wrapped up in that title, in that job description of what a leader is supposed to do, I feel like I'm doing air quotes much more often in this conversation than I normally would.
I had the same thought. Earlier, so I'm actually sitting on my hands now. I'm actually trying to sit on my hands because I was doing the same thing. I'm like, man, I am doing a lot of air quotes. That's funny. That's funny.
But if you get to the point that you're too wrapped up in the formality of it, it'll be too consuming. I think it just gets too intimidating.
Yeah. Yeah, I read somewhere or heard somewhere once that it was in an interview with another CEO that they said they never wanted to be the CEO of their organization, and then kind of on the side just kind of slid this one in there, and for me it was the most profound takeaway. They said and anybody who does want to be that kind of leader probably shouldn't be,
Mm.
and it was just really again, that was just my big takeaway. Like that wasn't the point he was trying to make at all. It was just something really profound about almost getting down on the level of the individual in order to get up on the level of the organization. Like you almost have to scale by doing things that aren't scalable, right? Like going high by getting low. It's a really interesting paradox, isn't it?
The way that I see it in terms of the mastermind, at least, is that if my goal is to grow a global movement, like you said, or a global community, and it's a perfectly fine and reasonable goal to have. But if that's what I am singularly focused on at the expense of the relationships that I need to have with individuals along the way, I'm not sure that I'm ever truly going to be leading. I may still
Mm,
build something, it may be fantastic. There may be a number of people that show up for it. But if I can't look around that room and see 100 individuals with whom I have connected meaningfully outside of that room, that I've gotten to know who they are, why they're there, what their hopes are, what they're fearful of, that I think is the hard and sometimes messy work of leadership.
yeah.
And there are people who can grow organizations and haven't done that messy work. And I don't disparage them, the organizations that they've grown, but I'm much more likely, I think, to be endeared to somebody who has said along the way, in this work of leadership, I'm going to get to know who you are as an individual, and we're going to form some sort of meaningful connection. And that is the starting place, I think, for any any productive or meaningful relationship, personal or professional.
I love that. I love that. I've got one more topic that I want to kind of broach with you. And it may be a shorter answer than I initially anticipated. But there's something to be said for volunteerism, right? Like this idea that if you're paying me a salary and you expect me to show up at 9 and stay until 5, I will show up at 9 and stay until 5. But then there's this kind of extra piece that you see in faith organizations, you see in charities and nonprofits, where people show up because they believe in something more than the paycheck or the title or the prestige or the benefits, right? They're showing up with a different motivation. And at HR Hot Seat, you are predominantly a volunteer organization. You've got a lot of people who are showing up, but they're not, and they're helping out and they're pitching in and they're bringing their resources and their connections.
Yeah.
And they're not actually getting compensated for it in any way. How is it different leading volunteers, or maybe a better way to say it, how do you kind of elicit that level of commitment when there's no, benefit? Oh, there are the air quotes again. The benefit in it. Can't go back to sitting on my hands now.
It's a great question. And of course, there is benefit. It just may not be monetary in nature, but that's where that connection comes in. Helping people find their why, helping them discover what it is, and then having me figure that out. That's why I want to get to know you. I want to know why you were individually there. I think, in my experience, there's no better model for what I'm doing with the mastermind, and this kind of sounds funny because it's not an obvious connection, than the extracurricular interest I have in classical choral singing. For 12, 13 years now, I have sung with 2 choirs in the city, people who are amateur in the best sense of the word. We don't get paid to come together to sing. On occasion, there's a paid gig, but once a week for the majority of the weeks in the year, either 60 in one choir's case or 120 in the other, come together for the love of music. And because we know we're a part of something so much greater than who we are as individuals. I mean, I could sit here and sing all day long in my home office. It's not going to be nearly as rewarding as coming together with 120 people at Harris Theater, or at a local, or a European cathedral, for example, or in just somebody's living room, to produce a sound that is so much greater than any of us as individuals could possibly make. And it's not just coming together once a week. It's coming together having driven in from Indiana or Wisconsin for some food. It's through the snow. It is having to find babysitters for children, knowing that we're doing something that appeals to us on such a fundamentally profound level that we're not going to experience elsewhere. And then, by the way, some of these same singers are on the boards of these organizations and doing so much more for their choirs, right? So I could go on and on about singing, but what I'm trying to, I think, articulate is then what I'm doing with the HR Hot Seat community, and it's a mastermind community where we get together to network and solve problems as HR professionals, is very much following a similar model. It's helping people, it's coming to understand myself, why people are there, what is that greater entity or purpose or vision that people have for their involvement. What are they getting out of it? How do they benefit in ways that aren't monetary? Because as you mentioned, I do have people just show up to volunteer, and then doing everything in my power to speak to those individual needs and motivations. And if I treat everybody in some sort of cookie cutter way and assume that you're there for the reason that somebody else is, I'm going to miss my opportunity to connect with you in the ways that I really truly want to.
I love that. I love the thoughtfulness that you're bringing to all of this. It's not cookie cutter. It's not out of a book. It's clearly been thought through and processed through and lived out and experienced and experimented on and tweaked and overhauled. And I love that you're bringing that. And I have no doubt that you will continue to grow with that sort of mentality and that sort of that approach in place.
Thank you. I'm working with licensees now that see what I have in place in downtown Chicago, and they get nervous. And I say, I've heard along the way, never compare your beginning to somebody else's middle. They see what I'm doing. They're like, oh, I don't know if I want to get into this. And I say, start where you are. Start with the audience that you have. I have been iterating on something for 2.5 years that has taken on kind of a life of its own, but it's a work in progress. I never would have imagined that what I had started out to establish would have turned into this. And I could have thrown up my hands along the way and said, this is too big for me or much more than I was looking to get into. But I think when you kind of have faith that it'll work out, and even if you can't see what that end looks like just yet, kind of roll with it. I mean, so much can happen in life.
Yeah. Well, and your expectation early on was 6 to 10 people, and you far exceeded that, outpaced that.
Yeah.
So, listen, we're about out of time. I do value your time. I want to be respectful of it and let you go on your way. Before you do, you've touched on a couple things today, and just want to make sure that we've clarified what it is that you do. If anybody's hearing this, if any of our listeners are going, man, I need that. You've got a couple different things that you offer, right? There's HR Hot Seat, which is for HR professionals to come together to mastermind and solve through their problems, right? So if you're listening today and you've got an HR team and you're thinking, man, this would be a great resource for them, Erich, how do they find out more?
hrhotseat.com will take them to the downtown Chicago chapter. And then they can poke around, learn about what we do if they're in the Chicago area. If they're not, hrhotseat.com/chapters will let people know where else we exist. And as I mentioned earlier, now that I'm licensing this brand, I'm eager to connect arms with folks all across the country who want something more out of their local HR networking options.
Very cool. And then the other piece that I don't want to miss, because we did spend a chunk of time talking about it today, is DISC workshops, where you will come in and facilitate DISC for organizations. So if you would just tell us a little bit about that, and the benefit to having someone like you, or specifically you, come in and run a workshop for an organization.
I appreciate you saying that. I say very explicitly in my LinkedIn headline that I'm a DISC nerd, and I come by that honestly. Who starts a company based on a personality assessment? Well, apparently I do. So I primarily go into organizations to facilitate a conversation on productive and effective communication in the workplace with any audience based on a better understanding of who we are and what people need from us. And there's a communication style thrown in there, personality style. Conversations go in all different directions, but it always ends up being so much fun and so enlightening for folks in an immediately applicable sort of way. If I'm not brought in to facilitate a conversation, oftentimes I'm just connecting organizations or coaches and consultants with the DISC materials that they need to bring value to their employees or to their clients. And so I can work with companies and consultants on different levels. But man, I joke about this regularly. You call me or email me and tell me you want to talk about DISC, and I will clear my schedule for that for the afternoon.
That's not a joke. I know that sounds like a joke, but that is 100% not a joke. As someone who knows Erich, I can vouch for that. Well, this has been fantastic. And to be clear, if you are interested in that service, in the DISC workshops, or finding out more about how your team can pull together to really maximize personality and strengths within your organization, that would be headed over to harmonyinsights.com, right?
Two different places. One, harmonyinsights.com, you'll find information there. And also the other link would be everythingdisc.com/insights. Either place, you'll find plenty of information. I'm very active on social media and post a lot about meaningful work and productive workplace relationships.
Awesome. Well, Erich, thank you very much for taking some time to come on today. Really appreciate it having you, and best of luck.
It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate it, Bryce.
Today's episode is brought to you by Upper Creative. Upper helps to align organizations from top to bottom, from leader to frontline employee, through strategic engagements to help solve your biggest business pain points. One-day workshops to build your team and work on a problem. And intelligent creative services. Photos, videos, graphics, and more to tell your story and extend your reach. Visit uppercreative.com today to discover how alignment can benefit your business, boost performance, and build a business that lasts. Upper Creative. Intelligent, strategic, creative. Next time on Chief.
I grew up in LA. I was a part of, early on in my days, I was aspiring to be a talent agent. And I think about it as, how do I cast Bryce in a role within my organization based on understanding his shape, where he will shine? Well, he'll become a star. And so when you feel like I care about you becoming a star, as opposed to you're going to be this position, these are your responsibilities, this is your title, and this is how you get judged, which minimizes your potential, everything I just said, then you're not, the full asset that you can be for the organization, for the people you're trying to serve.